November 18th, 1943. The blackout in wartime Britain wasn't just.
Yeah.
Wasn't the suggestion. It was a desperate, absolute necessity.
Absolutely. And in Swansea, Wales, which was a vital port, a huge industrial target, the dampness was total. A heavy, suffocating defense against the Luftwaffe.
But on this one cold night, that perfect darkness, it became a cloak for something else, something far more intimate and frankly, more terrifying than any distant threat of German bombers.
The time was late. We're talking somewhere between 10:45 and 10:50 p.m.
Okay.
And the location is Rhyddings Park Road in Brynmill, just a quiet residential street. And the discovery of the crime, it didn't rely on police action. It was pure chance, desperation, and the very meager light of a few handheld torches.
A young woman who was with an American soldier was walking down that pitch-black road. They were clearly distressed.
Right.
They started looking for help from strangers. They found two different people. First, a young girl, and then a workman who was, I think, carrying firewood home. They were begging these people to shine their torches into the shadows, into a front garden.
And there, in the combined, very weak illumination from those torches, the truth was laid bare.
What did they see?
In the front garden of the third or fourth house from the end of the road on the west side lay the body of 33-year-old Norah Irene Bartlett.
Norah was a local, a canteen worker who lived just down the street. She lived with her widowed mother.
Yes. And pathology confirmed the immediate horror of the scene. She had been brutally strangled and sexually assaulted.
The report, though, it noted minimal external injuries, right? Just a few scratches on her face.
That's correct. Which suggests a really swift, brutal attack, one that was executed under the absolute deepest cover of night.
So from an investigative standpoint, the key lead was right there. But it was also
immediately lost.
Yeah.
Norah was last seen with an American soldier, the one who was there at the discovery, and he subsequently vanished.
And in the chaos of World War II, with thousands of Allied servicemen streaming in and out of South Wales, that soldier just disappeared. He became a ghost.
A ghost in a massive logistical black hole, which left the case, from that night on, completely compromised.
Just think about that. A woman's life stolen so violently, so close to her own home. What must that atmosphere have been like for that community?
It's hard to imagine.
To know that a killer was not only among them, but was using the mandatory safety protocol, the Blackout, as a strategic shield from murder. The war, which was meant to protect Britain from outside threats, had inadvertently created the perfect operating environment for a domestic predator.
And that is the enduring tragedy of this case. It just showcases the profound investigative limitations of that era. For 81 years, Norah Bartlett's murder was treated as this isolated, tragic cold case. But now, in 2024, that entire narrative has been completely shattered.
The disruption comes from Professor David Wilson, a highly respected criminologist, former prison governor at Birmingham City University. Wilson took on this monumental task.
He did. He analyzed an interactive database with records of 1,000 unsolved UK murders. He was looking for patterns that local individual police reviews could just never detect.
And his analysis uncovered something truly chilling.
A significant geographic and temporal cluster of violent crimes, all concentrated in South Wales between 1943 and 1946. 3 women were murdered using very similar methods: strangulation and sexual assault, all within this narrow window of intense wartime disruption.
We're talking about Mabel Harper, killed in Cardiff in August 1943, then Alice Pittman, also killed in Cardiff in November 1943,
right,
shockingly close to where Harper was found.
And finally, Norah Bartlett, killed in Swansea, also in November 1943, with the same methodology.
So this is the central, agonizing question we're now forced to confront. Was a potential serial killer actively hunting women in South Wales, using the forced darkness of the Blackout as his cover?
Why did these murders cluster so tightly in this one region? Who was that vanished American soldier? And how much longer must justice be delayed for Norah Bartlett?
Welcome to Whispers of Crime. Follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime.
So to really grasp the failure of that 1943 investigation, you have to put yourself in the reality of the Blackout. Norah Irene Bartlett, she was 33, unmarried, working a vital job as a canteen worker, doing her part for the war effort.
Her world was very restricted. It was dominated by duty, by necessity. Living on Rhyddings Park Road with her mother, she had a routine, a route home that probably felt safe.
Until that night.
Until that night. The date, Thursday, November 18, 1943, It's much more significant than just a date on a calendar. Swansea had endured the three-nights blitz in 1941.
A devastating attack.
Absolutely. So the city was paranoid about German reconnaissance. The mandatory blackout was rigorously enforced. You have to imagine the streets near Rhyddings Park Road, not just dim, but absolutely pitch black.
Witnesses talked about having to feel their way along walls, didn't they? They did. The only light would have been from carefully hooded torches, or maybe the brief flash of a match being lit. It was into this suffocating darkness that the events of 10:45 p.m. unfolded.
And the witness accounts are they're haunting because they rely so much on these tiny external light sources.
Right.
This young woman and the American soldier, they were the crucial first point of contact. They saw a dark shape in that garden, the third or fourth one from the end, but they needed help to confirm their worst fears.
And that detail about the workman, the one carrying firewood, him being asked to use his torch, it just confirms the profound lack of visibility. It wasn't just poor light. It was an environment where a violent crime could be committed and the attacker could literally melt away into the surroundings, unseen and untraced, in seconds.
The pathology, as we mentioned, it revealed strangulation and sexual assault.
Yeah.
But the minimal injuries on her face, what does that suggest to you?
It suggests the attacker was either skilled at controlling the victim very quickly, or that the darkness afforded such complete surprise that she had very little chance to resist, to fight back effectively.
In the method itself, strangulation, it's so intimate, it requires close proximity.
It does. It's not a crime of opportunity carried out from a distance. It implies a highly personal, focused rage or compulsion.
Which leads us directly to the first and maybe the most profound investigative failure here, the vanishing American soldier.
The second Norah was last seen with him, he became the primary focus. But focusing on him for the civilian police force presented this multi-layered logistical nightmare.
You called it a logistical black hole, but let's break that down. What were the specific complexities of military jurisdiction in 1943? It wasn't like today.
Not at all. There was no modern NATO status of forces agreement governing Allied troops in the UK, so British law enforcement had severely limited power over U.S. servicemen.
So they couldn't just query a database?
No. When a civilian police force in South Wales needed to track an American soldier, they had to go through the U.S. military police, who had their own internal justice system. And this process was slow, it was bureaucratic, and it often prioritized military efficiency and security over a local criminal investigation.
And thousands of U.S. personnel were rotating through ports like Swansea and Cardiff.
Constantly. Ships arrived and left all the time. A soldier could literally be on a troop transport headed back to the U.S. or deployed to North Africa or Italy before the Swansea police even had the formal paperwork approved to start a trace request.
So even if the soldier was innocent, maybe just a witness who was terrified of being implicated and ran.
Even then, the inability of the police to rapidly find and interview him meant a critical window for gathering evidence was just lost forever.
And if he was the killer?
If he was the killer, the U.S. military's internal structure provided the perfect, unintentional shield for him to evade British justice entirely.
And this was all compounded by the state of the police resources at the time.
Dire. The local police departments were utterly stretched. Their focus was civil defense, enforcing the blackout, dealing with bomb damage, managing huge population shifts, and overseeing the logistics of all these allied forces. A single murder investigation, especially one lacking immediate witnesses or a clear perpetrator, it just couldn't command the level of manpower it needed. Not compared to the existential threat the whole nation was facing.
The public reaction, though, it did demand some kind of action. The press coverage was intense. Papers like the Western Mail and the Daily Herald made sure this wasn't a quiet tragedy.
The fear was palpable. You had a known threat from the sky, the Luftwaffe, and now this newly revealed unknown human threat lurking in the darkness on the ground.
And the result was local government getting involved.
It was. The murder, along with the general increase in attacks that were facilitated by the darkness, led Swansea Council to urgently petition the Minister of Home Security to implement modified street lighting.
So the authorities themselves recognized the blackout conditions were a direct factor.
They did. This public move confirmed it. They knew the murderer was an unintentional beneficiary of wartime policy.
But the reality of 1943 forensics, that also sealed Norah's case's fate, didn't it?
It did. Without a suspect, police were relying entirely on circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, and maybe some trace evidence.
And in 1943, trace evidence was, well, it was almost useless.
Almost. They could look at fibers, but the chemical analysis was rudimentary. They could identify blood types, sure, but DNA sequencing was decades away. Any biological evidence left at that scene would have degraded very quickly, and they certainly didn't have the technology to store or analyze it for future breakthroughs.
So the case just went cold.
It turned cold very quickly, not because the police weren't trying, but because the war environment had created this perfect storm of jurisdictional chaos, manpower shortages, and technological limitation.
And Norah Bartlett was ultimately interred at Mumbles Cemetery in Swansea. Her case just became a grim entry in the records, a footnote of wartime violence. A story that was too difficult, too fractured by the greater conflict to ever be resolved. Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating. Remember to check out our recent released UK historical cold case like this.
You know, the resilience of the police force in South Wales, despite all these historical limitations, it really does deserve recognition. The Norah Bartlett file wasn't just tossed aside and forgotten.
No, it wasn't.
The South Wales Police established one of Britain's first specialized cold case review teams in 1999, which showed a real commitment to historical justice. And the case has been reviewed periodically since then, confirming that this initial wound, it remained open.
But the true breakthrough, the complete reframing of the entire investigation, that only happened 81 years later. And it was thanks to academic rigor leveraging modern computing power.
Exactly. Professor David Wilson's 2024 analysis is not just another police review. It's a systematic criminological mapping effort. We are talking about using an interactive database of 1,000 unsolved UK murders to identify patterns that you just could not see when you're looking at paper files one by one.
So the core insight here is this shift from forensic evidence to statistical evidence.
That's a great way to put it. Traditional police work focuses on the individual crime scene. Wilson's methodology, it focuses on the landscape of crime. By inputting variables, location, date, victim characteristics, method of death, the software identifies clusters that defy normal statistical distribution.
So it's asking a different kind of question.
It is. It's asking, are these crimes just tragic coincidences, or are they geographically and temporally dense enough to suggest a single repeating pattern, a single offender?
And that's the critical distinction. That's what makes this modern analysis so transformative for a case that's 80 years old. It's the ability to quantify what maybe felt anecdotal before.
Right. If you have 3 women strangled in a 100-mile radius over 50 years, that's likely a coincidence. But if you have 3 women strangled, all sexually assaulted, within a 50-mile radius, within just 3 months, during a period of unique social chaos.
That becomes a statistically significant cluster.
Exactly. It indicates a very high probability of a single offender.
Wilson's immediate reaction really summarized the discovery, didn't it? He said something like, could the murder of these 2 women in Cardiff be linked? Yes.
He did. And that linkage, that simple question, completely changed the lens through which Norah Bartlett's tragedy is now viewed.
So let's detail these 2 linked victims in Cardiff, because their proximity and their timing are what initially raised the red flag in the database.
Okay, so first we have Mabel Harper. She was 53 years old, a widow. Her murder occurred on August 12, 1943. So this is just 3 months before Norah Bartlett's death.
And Mabel's circumstances.
Right.
Again, they just highlight the terror of the wartime night. She was found on a grass verge on Western Avenue in Cardiff, near the Taff Bridge. A busy area normally, but rendered silent and dark by the blackout.
And she was found after missing her last bus home.
The method of attack mirrors Norah's case, but with added violence.
It does. Mabel was beaten to death, sexually assaulted, and strangled. But the focus on sexual violence and strangulation establishes a very strong methodological connection to what happened in Swansea just 3 months later. And like Norah's case, the investigation stalled quickly. It was a low priority during the height of the war.
Then the second victim in Cardiff, she tightens this cluster dramatically. Alice Pittman, she was 29. Her date of death is November 1943.
The exact same month as Norah Bartlett.
The same month.
Alice Pittman was killed in Cathays Park, Cardiff. And if you map these locations, Cathays Park is less than 2 miles from where Mabel Harper was killed on Western Avenue.
So now we have 2 women, same city, killed weeks apart in the autumn of 43, within walking distance of each other, and both sharing the signature of strangulation and sexual assault.
The pattern is, it's terrifying in its precision. 3 women, 2 cities, 3 months, all sexually assaulted and strangled, all under the enforced criminalizing conditions of the blackout.
And Professor Wilson, he immediately drew parallels to other wartime serial killers like John Christie and, crucially, Gordon Cummins.
The Blackout Ripper.
Yes, the Blackout Ripper.
And the comparison to Cummins is highly instructive here. Cummins was a military serviceman who committed a series of brutal strangulations in London over just a few days in 1942, exploiting the blackout. But London's policing was vast and aggressive.
They caught him quickly.
Very quickly, within days of his final crime, because London still had the resources to mobilize immediately.
So the profound implication of this South Wales cluster is that a predator, using the exact same strategic advantage to the blackout, was able to operate for months entirely undetected.
Yes, because the investigative system in South Wales was fatally compromised by the war effort, the stretched resources, and those unique jurisdictional hurdles we talked about with the Allied troops.
They had their own Blackout Ripper.
But one who vanished into the chaos instead of being quickly contained.
And that realization, it changes the entire nature of the injustice. These weren't just random acts of violence spread across the UK.
No. They were likely the calculated movements of a single individual exploiting a systemic vulnerability that only a computer database decades later could finally and clearly illuminate.
Follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime.
So the initial cluster really focuses on the intense, focused violence of 1943. But Professor Wilson's full analysis, it extends the shadow of this potential predator into the post-war era. It links the 1943 cases to one of the UK's most heartbreaking and notorious cold cases, the murder of Muriel Drinkwater.
Muriel Drinkwater's case, June 27, 1946. It's tragically known as the Little Red Riding Hood murder.
Yeah.
And while VE Day had passed, Britain was still in this period of intense instability and disruption.
Right. Demobilization, shortages, a very slow return to civilian normality. It was still a chaotic time.
And Muriel was only 12 years old.
Just a young schoolgirl. Her body was found in Penlegare, an area near Swansea. So the geographic connection to Norah Bartlett's murder, just a few miles away in Brynmill, it maintains that regional link Wilson identified.
But here we hit a significant analytical snag, a big one. The method of death in Muriel's case. It introduces a radical variation.
A huge variation.
She was raped, severely bludgeoned about the head, and shot twice in the chest. That is a massive escalation from the purely manual strangulation we see in the 1943 cases of Norah Bartlett and Alice Pittman.
And this raises the classic profiling question. Does the huge difference in victim age, we're ranging from 12 to 53, and the shift from an intimate, non-weaponized method like strangulation to a highly public, weaponized method, does that fatally undermine the single serial killer theory?
That's precisely the challenge, isn't it? If the killer in 43 was a transient opportunist using the cover of darkness and proximity to achieve intimate control, why, 3 years later, would they risk getting and using a firearm and a bludgeon? Doesn't that suggest two different types of compulsion or maybe two different killers?
It's a valid skepticism. It's one that has to be explored. However, a serial predator's methodology, their modus operandi, is often fluid. It responds to circumstance.
So the MO can change, but the core signature stays the same.
Exactly. The compulsion, the desire to sexually assault and murder, that remains the key signature. In 1943, during the rigid blackout, a quieter MO like strangulation was strategically safer. By 1946, the blackouts were lifted, and the risk of detection was higher.
So the violence escalates.
An escalation in violence, using weapons to achieve rapid incapacitation or simply to fulfill a rising psychological need. It's common among serial offenders who feel untouchable after initial successes. The change in MO could be a calculated adaptation to the post-war environment, while still maintaining that core signature of sexual assault and the termination of the victim.
So when we synthesize Wilson's findings, he's focusing on these irreducible common factors that suggest a single source of predation across South Wales.
That's right. Firstly, there's the geographic proximity. 4 horrific murders, all clustered tightly within the Cardiff-Swansea corridor. This is not nationwide activity. This is focused regional targeting.
Secondly, the temporal clustering. The concentration within that 1943 to 1946 window, it just perfectly brackets the period of maximum administrative and investigative chaos around World War II and its immediate aftermath.
And thirdly, the signature methods. All 4 involve sexual violence and the complete termination of the victim through extreme force, whether it's manual strangulation or the combination of bludgeoning, shooting, and rape.
The inclusion of the Drinkwater case is so critical because Despite the greater brutality, it offered the only real hope of modern forensic justice.
It did. In 2008, 62 years after the crime, forensic scientists successfully extracted a partial DNA profile from Muriel Drinkwater's clothing.
That's just a monumental effort.
A huge effort, battling the degradation of textile evidence that was stored for decades. It allowed the South Wales police to begin systematically ruling out historical suspects. And crucially, in 2019, this DNA profile was used to definitively eliminate the notorious Welsh murderer Harold Jones, who had long been speculated about in connection with these kinds of historical Welsh crimes.
The focus then shifted. There was that 2020 BBC documentary, Darkland, Hunting the Killers. It focused investigative attention on a highly unsettling local suspect, Ronnie Harries.
Harries was a known local criminal. He was hanged in 1954 for a separate double murder.
And the chilling detail that tied Harries to this cluster, specifically to the Drinkwater case.
Is the evidence suggesting he was actually employed by Muriel Drinkwater's father at the time of her death in 1946?
So that pivots the entire investigation. It moves away from the unknown transient American soldier and towards a local predator who was maybe hidden in plain sight, just using the regional chaos as his shield.
The ultimate investigative goal for this whole cluster now hinges on that 2008 DNA profile from Muriel Drinkwater's clothing.
Right.
If police could find a familial match, or if that profile directly links to the perpetrator who sexually assaulted and strangled Norah Bartlett, Mabel Harper, or Alice Pittman, then Wilson's theory is proven, and 4 cases are solved in one go.
So the presence of that DNA profile in the Drinkwater case provides the only current potential path to linking all 4 murders definitively.
It's the only one. And until that link is made or the killer is identified through some other means, Norah Bartlett remains a victim of a historical failure, now tragically understood to be part of a much larger, much more sinister pattern of predation.
81 years of silence.
Wow.
81 years of injustice. It forces you to look back and really understand the scope of the failures that allowed this predator or predators to operate with such apparent impunity in South Wales.
And it wasn't incompetence. That's the key thing to remember. It was a devastating alignment of systemic hurdles.
So let's consolidate those barriers. First and foremost, the wartime conditions. The absolute blackout. It eliminated the street-level witness. It turned every street corner into a potential ambush site.
It ensured crimes were committed and hidden in the same instant.
Second, the severe constraint on police resources. We cannot overstate that local police were just struggling to manage the basic maintenance of law and order alongside their civil defense duties. A dedicated long-term murder investigation was a luxury they simply could not afford in 1943.
Third, the specific, crippling hurdle of jurisdictional complexities with the American soldier. British police authority was so limited over U.S. servicemen. Tracing one individual among the tens of thousands moving through the area was a task that required international cooperation that just wasn't built for speed during the heat of war.
Fourth, the technological void. The absence of modern forensic techniques in 1943 meant that any limited physical evidence fibers, trace biological material, couldn't be effectively analyzed or stored or compared across crime scenes that were separated by miles and months.
And finally, the ultimate barrier, the passage of time. 81 years. It guarantees that crucial witnesses are deceased, memories have faded, and most likely the perpetrator himself is no longer living. The hunt is no longer for a living person. It's for a ghost in the records.
This timeline, it forces us to consider the profound concept of justice delayed. What does it mean for the legacy of Norah Bartlett, a woman whose life was just extinguished in the dark, only for modern research to suggest she wasn't an isolated victim, but one of 4 women claimed by a serial killer hidden by the war?
The pain for the families. I mean, Norah's widowed mother never saw justice. It's immeasurable. But it also raises a crucial historical question about official accountability. When does an unsolved case stop being an active investigation and become purely a historical footnote?
In South Wales Police, by maintaining the cold case team and periodically reviewing the files, they're insisting the wounds are still active.
They are. The possibility of finding a familial DNA match or linking the Drinkwater profile to the 1943 victims means that file must remain open.
Professor Wilson's 2024 analysis, it elevates Norah Bartlett's case from a local tragedy to a critical academic case study. It's now used to analyze wartime crime patterns, the impact of resource depletion on investigations,
And the development of serial predation in unique social environments. And that gives her death a historical significance that really transcends the initial failure to solve it.
The broader lesson derived from this historical analysis is a chilling one, isn't it? Chaos is the great enabler of undetected crime.
It is. When resources are strained, when infrastructure is deliberately compromised, which the blackout did with light, and when priorities shift to national security, the vacuum that's created is immediately exploited by predators. The blackout era, meant to shield the nation, inadvertently shielded a murderer.
So the lasting impact of Professor Wilson's work is this stark realization that the extreme conditions of WWII Britain, the blackouts, the military chaos, the administrative bottlenecks, all of it created an unprecedented, long-lasting operational environment for a serial predator to claim 4 victims across South Wales.
Norah Bartlett's death wasn't just a tragic product of a dark night. It was the clearest signpost of a sustained, hidden pattern of violence that took 8 decades to fully map. And even though the likelihood of identifying the person responsible for the 1943 strangulations decreases every year, the case it can't be closed. The weight of that systemic failure is too great.
So we encourage you to reflect on this contrast. The swift capture of Gordon Cummins, the London blackout ripper, versus the years of quiet, sustained violence suggested by this South Wales cluster. Was this killer simply more organized, moving deliberately between Cardiff and Swansea? Or were the wartime investigative failures in South Wales during that terrifying period so profound, so compromised by the military presence and the lack of resources, that they fundamentally allowed this serial killer to continue his reign of terror undetected for years?
The failure to catch this individual, if they were indeed one person, allowed them to claim the lives of 4 women, ranging from a child to a middle-aged widow, across 4 years of British history. And this provides the ultimate historical reflection on the limitations of wartime crime investigation and the persistent, enduring quest for justice, even 81 years later.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating. Remember to check out our recent released UK historical cold case like this.
Thank you for joining us as we explored the shadows of the Blackout Killer.